The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Windsor Castle, where three figures stood in what appeared to be polite conversation, but felt more like a carefully choreographed dance of tension. Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, maintained her characteristic composure despite the undercurrent of hostility that seemed to emanate from the woman standing beside her future father-in-law. Camilla's smile never quite reached her eyes, and there was something almost predatory about the way she observed Kate's every movement. Charles had requested this meeting under the pretense of discussing upcoming royal engagements, but Kate sensed there was more to it. The way Camilla had positioned herself slightly closer to Charles, the subtle touches she made to his arm during conversation, and the pointed looks she gave Kate all suggested this was about establishing territory rather than planning events. "I do think," Camilla said, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority she had cultivated since becoming queen consort, "that some of the younger members of the family might benefit from understanding how things have always been done. Tradition, after all, is what holds the monarchy together." Kate felt the words like small needles, each one designed to remind her that she was still considered an outsider by some. Despite her years of service, despite her marriage to William, despite the public's overwhelming love for her, there were still those within the family who saw her as the girl who had dared to reach above her station. "Of course, Your Majesty," Kate replied, her voice steady and warm. "I've always believed in honoring tradition while also connecting with the people we serve. After all, the monarchy's strength lies in its ability to evolve with the times while maintaining its core values." The response was perfectly diplomatic, but Kate caught the flash of irritation that crossed Camilla's features. It was quickly masked, replaced by that same cold smile, but Charles had seen it too. Kate noticed how his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and how his hands, which had been clasped behind his back, now clenched into fists. "Evolution," Camilla repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "Such a modern concept. I suppose that's what happens when one comes from different circumstances." The pause before those last words was deliberate, calculated to wound. Kate had faced this type of subtle cruelty before, particularly in her early days as William's girlfriend. She had learned to navigate these treacherous waters with grace, never giving her detractors the satisfaction of seeing her break. But today felt different. Today, there was something more vicious in Camilla's attacks, something that spoke to deeper insecurities and jealousies. "I've been fortunate," Kate said, her voice never wavering, "to have had the opportunity to learn from so many wonderful people. The British public has been incredibly welcoming, and their support has meant everything to me as I've grown into this role." It was a masterful deflection, turning what could have been a defensive response into a statement about public support, something that everyone knew Kate enjoyed far more than Camilla ever had. The queen consort smile became even more strained, and Kate noticed how Camilla's grip on her small clutch purse tightened until her knuckles showed white. Charles cleared his throat, a sound that seemed to echo across the garden despite their close proximity. "Perhaps," he said, his voice carrying a warning edge, "we should focus on the matter at hand. The upcoming charity gala requires careful coordination between all senior members of the family." But Camilla seemed determined to press on with her subtle campaign. "Oh yes, the gala. I do hope all the speeches will be properly vetted this time. We can't have any impromptu moments that might reflect poorly on the institution." She turned to Kate with that same false smile. "I'm sure you understand the importance of staying on message, my dear." The implication was clear. Camilla was referencing Kate's recent speech about mental health awareness, which had received widespread praise for its authenticity and emotional depth. It had been unscripted in parts, allowing Kate to speak from the heart about issues close to her. The public had loved it, but apparently, some within the palace walls had found it too honest, too real. Kate nodded graciously. "Authenticity has always been important to me. I believe people can sense when you're being genuine, and that connection is what makes our work meaningful." "Authenticity," Camilla mused, as if tasting the word. "How wonderfully American of you. Though I suppose in your position, one must find ways to remain relevant." The insult was barely veiled now, and Kate felt a familiar fire kindle in her chest. But she had learned long ago that responding with anger would only give Camilla what she wanted. Instead, she smiled, a real smile this time, warm and confident. I've always found that relevance comes naturally when you genuinely care about the people you serve, Kate said. It's not something you have to strive for. It just happens when your work comes from the heart. Charles's breathing had grown noticeably heavier, and Kate could see the muscles in his neck tensing. His relationship with both women was complicated, fraught with the weight of history and expectation. Camilla was his wife, his choice, the woman he had waited decades to marry. But Kate was his daughter-in-law, the mother of his grandchildren, and, perhaps most importantly, she represented the future of the monarchy in a way that Camilla never could. The tension was becoming palpable now, like the charge in the air before a thunderstorm. Garden staff who had been tending to nearby flower beds seemed to sense something and had quietly retreated to other areas. Even the birds seemed to have stopped their morning songs, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Camilla took a step closer to Kate, her voice dropping to what might have appeared to be a confidential tone, but was clearly meant to intimidate. You know, my dear, there are some of us who remember when this family faced its greatest challenges, when it seemed the monarchy itself might not survive. It takes a particular kind of strength to weather those storms, the kind that comes from understanding that personal desires must sometimes be sacrificed for duty. Kate understood the subtext perfectly. Camilla was reminding her of the Diana years, of the chaos and scandal that had nearly brought down the institution. She was positioning herself as the stable influence, the one who had helped Charles through his darkest hours, while implying that Kate, like Diana before her, might prove to be a destabilizing force. I've always believed, Kate replied, her voice steady as stone, that the greatest strength comes from unity. When the family stands together, when we support each other's work and celebrate each other's successes, that's when we're most effective. Division only weakens us. It was a pointed response, and Camilla's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the sharp anger beneath. But before she could formulate a response, Charles stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried a tone Kate had never heard before, cold, controlled fury that made the morning air seem to freeze around them. I think, Charles said, each word carefully measured, that we've covered quite enough ground for one morning. Camilla, perhaps you have other matters requiring your attention. It wasn't a suggestion. Camilla's face went through a rapid series of expressions: surprise, hurt, anger, and finally, a forced composure. Of course, darling, though I do hope we'll continue this conversation soon. She turned to Kate with one final smile that looked more like a baring of teeth. Always such a pleasure, Catherine. As Camilla walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the stone path, Charles remained motionless, watching her retreat. Kate could see the war being fought behind his eyes, loyalty to his wife battling against protection of his family's future, personal affection struggling against institutional necessity. Your Majesty, Kate began softly, but Charles held up a hand. Please, he said, his voice suddenly tired, aged by the weight of the moment. Just give me a moment. They stood in silence for several minutes. The only sounds the distant hum of London traffic and the gentle rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. Kate studied Charles's profile, noting the lines that seemed deeper today, the way his shoulders carried a burden that went far beyond the physical weight of his ceremonial regalia. Finally, Charles turned to face her, and Kate was struck by the complexity of emotions in his eyes. There was frustration, certainly, but also something that looked like apology and perhaps even gratitude. You handled that with remarkable grace, he said quietly. More grace than the situation deserved. Kate felt a flush of warmth at the unexpected praise. Family dynamics can be challenging, she said diplomatically, but I believe we all want what's best for the monarchy. Charles's laugh was short and bitter. Do we? He asked. Sometimes I wonder if we've confused what's best for ourselves with what's best for the institution. The lines become blurred when personal relationships intersect with duty. It was perhaps the most honest thing Kate had ever heard him say, and she sensed this was a rare moment of vulnerability from a man who had spent his entire life in the public eye. "I think," Kate said carefully, "that authenticity and duty don't have to be mutually exclusive. The public responds when they see real people behind the titles, when they know that we genuinely care about them and their concerns." Charles nodded slowly. "Your popularity with the people, it's not accidental, is it? You found a way to be both royal and relatable, traditional and modern. That's not an easy balance to strike." "I've had good teachers," Kate replied, thinking of the Queen, of Diana's memory, of the countless people she'd met who would share their stories with her. "And I've made mistakes along the way. But I've learned that people forgive mistakes when they believe you're genuinely trying to serve them." "Camilla sees your popularity as a threat," Charles said suddenly, the words tumbling out as if he'd been holding them back for months. "She's worked so hard to gain acceptance, to move past the public's initial resistance to our marriage. Your natural connection with people, it highlights what she's never been able to achieve." Kate felt a pang of sympathy for the older woman, despite everything that had just transpired. The journey from being seen as a marriage wrecker to queen consort had been long and difficult for Camilla, and Kate could understand how watching someone else seem to effortlessly achieve what you'd fought for might breed resentment. "I never intended to diminish anyone else's contributions," Kate said sincerely. "There's room for all of us to serve in our own ways." "You're more generous than I would be in your position," Charles said with a rueful smile. "But then that's exactly why the people love you. You don't see other people's success as your failure, or their approval as something that takes away from yours." The conversation was interrupted by the approach of one of Charles's private secretaries, a thin man with nervous energy who clearly had urgent business to discuss. Charles sighed, the moment of openness closing as duty reasserted itself. "We'll need to address this," Charles said to Kate as the secretary drew near. "The family dynamics, I mean. This can't continue." Kate nodded, understanding both the immediate reference and the broader implications. "Of course, Your Majesty. Whatever you think is best." As Charles turned to speak with his secretary, Kate remained in the garden for a few moments longer, processing what had just occurred. The confrontation with Camilla had been more intense than usual, but it was Charles's reaction that really gave her pause. She had seen him angry before, but never quite like this, never with that barely controlled fury that spoke to deeper frustrations and longer-held grievances. The wind picked up, rustling through the ancient oak trees that had witnessed centuries of royal drama, and Kate pulled her jacket closer around herself. She thought about William, about their children, about the future they were all building together. Whatever came next, she would face it as she had faced everything else in her royal life, with dignity, grace, and an unwavering commitment to the people she served. But as she walked back toward the castle, Kate couldn't shake the feeling that this morning had been a turning point, that the careful balance of relationships within the royal family had shifted in some fundamental way. Charles's fury, barely contained as it was, suggested that even his considerable patience had limits. And when those limits were reached, the consequences would ripple far beyond the walls of Windsor Castle. The game had changed, and Kate realized that she was no longer just a player in it. She had become a central figure around whom the future of the monarchy would pivot. It was a responsibility that both thrilled and terrified her, but one she was determined to bear with the same grace that had carried her through every challenge thus far. As she reached the castle's entrance, Kate paused to look back at the garden where so much had been said without being spoken, where alliances had been tested and loyalties had been revealed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve, and undoubtedly new tests of the delicate relationships that held the royal family together. But today, she had remained poised in the face of hostility, had responded to cruelty with grace, and had perhaps, in some small way, helped Charles see the path forward through the complex web of family, duty, and personal loyalty that defined their lives. The days following the garden confrontation had passed in a strange kind of suspended animation. Kate threw herself into her royal duties with even more dedication than usual, visiting children's hospitals, attending charity events, and meeting with organizations focused on early childhood development. Each appearance seemed to generate more positive press, more public affection, and increasingly more pointed comparisons to other members of the royal family. William had noticed the change in his wife immediately. There was a new steel in her backbone, a subtle shift in how she carried herself that spoke to someone who had been tested and had emerged stronger. When he asked about the meeting at Windsor, Kate had given him the essential details but had downplayed the emotional impact. She was protecting him, as she always did, from the family drama that could pull him in impossible directions. But the ripple effects of that morning were becoming impossible to ignore. Charles had been unusually distant during subsequent family gatherings, his interactions with Camilla marked by a coolness that even their staff had begun to notice. The Queen Consort, for her part, seemed to be escalating her campaign of subtle undermining, making increasingly pointed comments about maintaining standards and remembering one's place. The breaking point came during what should have been a routine family dinner at Clarence House. It was meant to be an intimate gathering, just Charles, Camilla, William, Kate, and a few other senior royals. The conversation had started pleasantly enough, focusing on upcoming engagements and shared memories from recent events. Kate was discussing her recent visit to a cancer research facility when Camilla interrupted with what appeared to be a casual observation. "It's wonderful how enthusiastic you are about your causes, Catherine, though I do sometimes wonder if perhaps a more measured approach might serve the family better." William's fork paused halfway to his mouth, and Kate felt the familiar tightness in her chest that preceded one of Camilla's attacks. But this time felt different. This time, Charles was watching his wife with an expression that Kate had never seen before. Disappointment mixed with something approaching disgust. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean," Kate replied calmly, though she understood perfectly well. Camilla's smile was razor-sharp. "Well, there's such a thing as being too available, too eager to please. The monarchy maintains its mystique through a certain level of distance, don't you think? When one appears too often in the papers, makes too many public statements, it can begin to look rather desperate for attention." The silence that followed was deafening. William had gone completely still beside Kate, his face flushed with anger. Even the staff seemed to have frozen in place, sensing the dangerous shift in the room's atmosphere. Desperate for attention, Charles repeated the words slowly, as if tasting them. His voice was quiet, but there was something volcanic building beneath the surface. "That's an interesting choice of words, Camilla." Kate could see that Camilla was beginning to realize she had gone too far, but she was too committed to the attack to retreat gracefully. "I simply meant that perhaps a more selective approach." "Stop." Charles's voice cut through her words like a blade. "Just stop." The king rose from his chair, his movements deliberate and controlled in a way that somehow made them more frightening than if he had shouted. "You speak of desperation for attention? You, who spent decades courting the press in hopes of gaining public acceptance. You, who has orchestrated countless photo opportunities and strategic leaks to improve your image." Kate had never seen Charles like this. His famous composure had cracked completely, revealing a fury that had been building for far longer than just this evening. Camilla's face had gone pale, her confident mask finally slipping to reveal genuine shock. "Charles, please," Camilla began, but he held up a hand to silence her. "No, I think it's time some things were said clearly." Charles turned to Kate, and his voice, while still angry, carried a note of something like tenderness. "Catherine has done more for this family's reputation in the past decade than any of us have managed in our entire lives. She has connected with people in a way that is both genuine and effective. She has brought dignity to every appearance, grace to every challenge, and authenticity to every interaction." Kate felt tears threatening and blinked them back, overwhelmed by the unexpected defense from a man who had always maintained careful neutrality in family conflicts. Charles wasn't finished. She has raised our grandchildren with love and wisdom. She has supported William through every challenge. She has honored Diana's memory while creating her own legacy. And she has done all of this while facing exactly the kind of petty jealousy and mean-spirited attacks you've just demonstrated. Camilla's hands were shaking now, and Kate felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for the older woman. This public dressing down was brutal, made worse by the presence of staff and family members who would certainly discuss it for years to come. She has never once, Charles continued, his voice rising now, shown anything but respect for you, despite provocation that would have driven a lesser person to respond in kind. She has been everything this family could have hoped for in a future queen, and you have repaid her grace with spite and pettiness that diminishes us all. William had reached over to take Kate's hand, his own grip tight with emotion. She could see her husband processing his father's words, perhaps understanding for the first time how much Kate had endured in silence, how many attacks she had absorbed without complaint. "You want to talk about maintaining standards?" Charles asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Then perhaps you should start by examining your own behavior. Because what I've witnessed today falls far below any standard worthy of this family or this institution." The silence that followed stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Camilla sat frozen in her chair, her face a mask of humiliation and fury. Kate could see the calculations happening behind her eyes, the struggle between her desire to fight back and her understanding that she had lost this battle completely. Finally, Camilla rose from her chair, her movement stiff with wounded dignity. "I see," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "I had no idea that honesty was no longer valued in this family. I was simply expressing my opinion about what might be best for the monarchy." "Your opinion," Charles said flatly, "is noted and rejected." Camilla's departure from the dining room was swift but dignified, her years of training serving her well even in retreat. But the damage had been done, and everyone remaining at the table understood that something fundamental had shifted in the family dynamic. Charles remained standing for several moments after his wife's exit, his breathing gradually returning to normal. When he finally sat back down, he looked exhausted, as if the confrontation had drained something vital from him. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said quietly, addressing the table in general, but looking specifically at Kate. "It's been building for some time." Kate found her voice at last. "You didn't need to defend me, Your Majesty. I can handle—" "No," Charles interrupted. "You shouldn't have to handle it. Not anymore." He looked directly at her, his eyes filled with something that might have been paternal affection. "You've proven yourself 1,000 times over. Anyone who can't see that is willfully blind." William spoke for the first time since the confrontation began. "Father, you have an extraordinary wife," Charles said, cutting him off. "I hope you tell her that every day, because she deserves to hear it." The remainder of the dinner passed in subdued conversation, with everyone carefully avoiding any mention of what had just occurred. But Kate could feel the change in how the other family members looked at her, a new level of respect and recognition that she had always hoped for but never expected to receive in quite this way. As they prepared to leave, Charles asked Kate to walk with him privately. They stepped out onto a small terrace overlooking the gardens, where the evening air was cool and refreshing after the stifling tension of the dining room. "I owe you an apology," Charles said without preamble. "I should have addressed this situation much sooner. I allowed my desire to keep peace in my personal life to override my responsibility to protect you as a member of this family." Kate was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Marriage is complicated under the best circumstances. When you add the pressure of public life, the weight of history, the scrutiny of the media, I can't imagine how difficult it must be to balance all the competing loyalties and expectations. Charles smiled ruefully. "You're very diplomatic. More diplomatic than I was this evening." "Sometimes," Kate said gently, "diplomacy isn't enough. Sometimes people need to hear hard truths, even if it's painful." "Camilla has struggled," Charles said, his voice heavy with years of accumulated guilt and frustration. The public's initial reaction to our marriage was difficult. She's felt constantly judged, constantly found wanting when compared to Diana's memory. I think watching you receive the kind of natural acceptance she's always craved became unbearable for her. Kate nodded thoughtfully. I understand why that would be painful. But comparison is the enemy of happiness. We each have to find our own way to serve, our own way to connect with people. You make it look so effortless, Charles said with a hint of wonderment. The way you interact with people, the genuine warmth you project, it's not something that can be taught or manufactured. It's not effortless, Kate admitted. Every public appearance still makes me nervous. I still worry about saying the wrong thing, making a mistake that could embarrass the family. But I've learned that people respond to authenticity, even imperfect authenticity, better than they respond to polished perfection. Charles was quiet for several minutes, and Kate could see him working through complex emotions. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with regret. I've made mistakes, he said quietly. In trying to protect Camilla's feelings, I allowed her to believe that her position gave her the right to diminish others. I should have made it clear from the beginning that respect flows in all directions within this family. It's not too late, Kate said softly. Relationships can heal if both people are willing to do the work. Charles looked at her with something approaching amazement. Even after everything she's put you through, you're still hoping for reconciliation? Kate shrugged slightly. Division weakens us all. I'd rather find a way forward together than continue this, whatever this has been. You're remarkable, Charles said simply. William is incredibly fortunate. We all are. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lights of London twinkle in the distance. Kate thought about the journey that had brought her to this point, from the shy girl who had caught Prince William's eye at university to the woman standing here now, having earned the king's respect and support. What happens now? She asked eventually. Charles sighed deeply. Now, I have to go back inside and try to repair my marriage while making it clear that certain behaviors will no longer be tolerated. It won't be easy. The best things rarely are, Kate observed. As they prepared to go back inside, Charles touched her arm gently. Thank you, he said simply, for your grace, your patience, your service to this family, and for helping me see clearly tonight. Kate felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sense of finally being truly accepted and valued by the man who would shape the monarchy's future. Thank you for defending me, she said. It means more than you know. Inside, they found William waiting with barely contained emotion. The ride home was quiet, with both Kate and William lost in their own thoughts about what they had witnessed and what it might mean for their future. It wasn't until they were safely behind the closed doors of their own home that William finally spoke. I had no idea it had gotten that bad, he said, pulling Kate into his arms. Why didn't you tell me how cruel she was being? Kate buried her face in his shoulder, finally, allowing herself to feel the full impact of the evening's events. Because you love your father, and I didn't want to put you in an impossible position. Family is complicated enough without me adding to the drama. Your family too, William said fiercely. You're my family, my wife, the mother of my children, my partner in everything. If someone attacks you, they attack me. Kate pulled back to look at him, seeing the fierce protectiveness in his eyes that reminded her why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. Your father made that very clear tonight. I think things might be different going forward. They'd better be, William said grimly. I won't watch anyone treat you that way again, no matter who they are. As they prepared for bed, Kate reflected on the strange turns the day had taken. She had entered the evening dreading another uncomfortable dinner, and she was ending it feeling more secure in her position within the royal family than ever before. Charles's fierce defense of her had been unexpected and deeply moving, but more than that, it had established clear boundaries that everyone would have to respect going forward. The battle with Camilla wasn't over. Kate was realistic enough to know that wounded pride and long-held resentments didn't heal overnight. But the ground had shifted decisively in her favor, and she had the king's explicit support in a way she had never had before. As she drifted off to sleep beside her husband, Kate allowed herself to imagine a future where the family could find a way to work together, where personal animosities didn't undermine their shared mission of service. It might be naive to hope for such an outcome, but after everything she had survived, Kate had learned that sometimes the most unlikely possibilities were worth fighting for. The weeks following the explosive dinner at Clarence's house had brought an unexpected period of calm to the royal family dynamics. Camilla had retreated into a careful politeness that masked whatever turmoil might be churning beneath the surface, while Charles seemed to walk taller, as if having finally spoken his truth had lifted a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying. Kate found herself in the strange position of being both more secure and more scrutinized than ever before. The king's public defense of her had not gone unnoticed by palace staff, royal watchers, or the media. There was a new deference in how she was treated, a recognition that she enjoyed a level of support from Charles that few had anticipated. But with that support came new pressures. Kate began to sense that she was being watched for any sign of arrogance or entitlement, any indication that Charles's favor might have gone to her head. She responded by doubling down on the grace and humility that had always been her hallmarks, refusing to allow success to change her fundamental approach to royal life. The first real test of the new dynamic came during preparations for the annual state opening of Parliament. It was one of the monarchy's most formal occasions, steeped in tradition and protocol, where every detail mattered and every relationship was on display for the world to see. Kate had always found the ceremony somewhat intimidating. The weight of history, the elaborate costumes, the precise choreography that left no room for error. But this year felt different. This year, she would be walking into Westminster with the knowledge that she had the king's full support, that her position in the family was secure in a way it had never been before. The morning of the ceremony dawned gray and drizzly, typical London weather that seemed to match the somber grandeur of the occasion. Kate stood in her dressing room at Buckingham Palace, surrounded by ladies-in-waiting and stylists who were putting the finishing touches on her appearance. The navy blue dress she had chosen was elegant but appropriately subdued, paired with a sapphire tiara that had belonged to the late queen. As she studied her reflection in the ornate mirror, Kate thought about all the women who had worn similar tiaras, carried similar responsibilities, faced similar challenges. The weight of the jewels on her head felt symbolic of the broader weight she carried as a senior royal, the expectations and obligations that came with her position. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. One of her ladies-in-waiting stepped forward to answer it, returning with news that Prince William was waiting outside to escort her to the carriage. Kate took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and prepared to face another chapter in her royal story. William looked resplendent in his formal military uniform, every inch the future king he was destined to become. But when he saw Kate, his expression softened with the same wonder and appreciation he had shown when she walked down the aisle on their wedding day. "You look magnificent," he said simply, offering her his arm. "I feel like I'm wearing someone else's life," Kate admitted with a nervous laugh. "Some mornings I still can't quite believe this is real." "It's real," William assured her as they began walking toward the entrance where their carriage waited. "And you belong here more than anyone." The carriage procession through London was always one of Kate's favorite parts of state occasions. Seeing the crowds lining the streets, the faces pressed against the barriers, the children waving flags, it reminded her why the pageantry mattered, why maintaining these traditions served a purpose beyond mere spectacle. At Westminster, the choreography of arrival was as precise as a ballet. Kate and William took their designated places in the procession, moving with the measured pace that the occasion demanded. Kate could see Camilla ahead of her, walking beside Charles with perfect posture and a serene expression that gave no hint of recent tensions. But as they entered the House of Lords, Kate noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. Camilla had paused just long enough to ensure that Kate would have to walk slightly behind her, a subtle assertion of precedence that was technically correct but felt deliberately pointed. It was a small thing, easily dismissed as adherence to protocol, but Kate recognized it for what it was, a reminder that their conflict was far from over. Charles, walking just ahead of Camilla, seemed to sense the manipulation as well. Kate saw his shoulders tense slightly, though he maintained his dignified pace. The procession continued without incident, but Kate could feel the undercurrent of tension that threatened to disrupt the ceremonial calm. The ceremony itself proceeded with its usual mixture of ancient ritual and contemporary politics. Kate found herself studying the faces around her, peers of the realm, government ministers, diplomatic representatives from around the world. Many of them were watching her as much as they were watching the king, and she could sense the calculations happening behind their polite expressions. It was during the reading of the Queen's speech that Kate became aware of a different kind of scrutiny. Several cameras had found her among the assembled royals, and she could see the red recording lights that indicated she was being broadcast live around the world. The knowledge that millions of people were watching her every expression, analyzing her every gesture, was both thrilling and terrifying. But it was Camilla's behavior that truly captured her attention. The Queen Consort had positioned herself in such a way that many of the camera angles that captured Kate also included her, creating a visual comparison that seemed intentional. And throughout the ceremony, Camilla maintained an expression of regal composure that somehow managed to suggest that she was the true star of the proceedings. Kate recognized the performance for what it was, a sophisticated attempt to reclaim narrative control after the disaster at Clarence House. Camilla was reminding everyone that she was the Queen Consort, that her position was established and unassailable, regardless of whatever personal conflicts might exist behind palace walls. But Charles was watching too, and Kate could see the familiar tightness around his eyes that indicated his growing irritation with his wife's theatrical display. When the cameras lingered on a shot that showed both Camilla and Kate, with Camilla positioned to appear more prominent, Charles's jaw clenched so hard that Kate wondered if others could see it. The moment that crystallized everything came during the procession out of the chamber. Protocol dictated a specific order of precedence, but there was always some flexibility in the precise positioning. As they moved toward the exit, Camilla made what appeared to be an innocent adjustment to her pace, but the effect was to subtly overshadow Kate in the sight lines of both the assembled dignitaries and the television cameras. It was a masterful bit of manipulation, subtle enough to be dismissed as coincidence, but deliberate enough to achieve its intended effect. Kate found herself admiring Camilla's skill, even as she felt frustrated by the pettiness of it all. After everything that had been said, after Charles's explicit support, they were still playing these games. But Charles had seen it too, and this time his reaction was immediate. With movements so subtle that only those closest to him would notice, the king adjusted his own pace and positioning in a way that brought Kate forward and relegated Camilla to a less prominent position. It was a quiet but unmistakable correction, a reminder of where his loyalties lay. The remainder of the ceremony passed without further incident, but Kate could feel the electricity of unresolved conflict crackling beneath the surface. As they prepared for the carriage procession back to the palace, she found herself wondering how long this delicate balance could be maintained. The ride back through London was subdued compared to their earlier journey. William seemed lost in thought, processing what he had observed, while Kate stared out at the cheering crowds and wondered if they had any idea of the dramas playing out within the royal carriages. It wasn't until they were back at Buckingham Palace, away from cameras and crowds, that the tension finally erupted. Kate had just finished changing out of her formal attire when one of Charles's private secretaries appeared with a request for her immediate presence in the king's study. She found Charles standing by the window, still in his ceremonial robes, staring out at the palace gardens where tourists and photographers maintained their constant vigil. He didn't turn around when she entered, but his voice carried a weariness that spoke to deep exhaustion. "Did you notice what happened during the procession?" he asked without preamble. Kate hesitated, unsure how much she should reveal about what she had observed. There seemed to be some Positioning adjustments, she said carefully. Charles laughed, but there was no humor in it. Positioning adjustments. That's diplomatic of you. He finally turned to face her, and Kate was shocked by the lines of strain around his eyes. She can't help herself, can she? Even after everything we discussed, even after I made my position clear, she still has to play these petty games. Your Majesty, Kate began, but Charles waved her to silence. I watched the whole thing, he said bitterly. Every calculated step, every deliberate camera angle. It was like watching someone sabotage themselves out of pure spite. Kate felt a surge of sympathy for the man in front of her. Charles had spent his entire life balancing personal desires against institutional needs, and now he was facing the realization that his wife might be fundamentally incapable of putting the broader good ahead of her own insecurities. Marriage is complicated, Kate said gently, echoing words she had spoken before. Maybe she just needs time to adjust to the new dynamic. Charles looked at her with something approaching amazement. Even now, after everything she's done, you're still trying to find a charitable interpretation of her behavior. I'm trying to find a path forward, Kate replied honestly. For everyone's sake, including hers. Charles was quiet for a long moment, studying Kate's face as if trying to understand the source of her seemingly inexhaustible grace. You realize that your generosity is being interpreted as weakness by some, don't you? That there are people who think your refusal to fight back makes you vulnerable. Kate smiled ruefully. I've heard that criticism before, but I've found that responding to aggression with more aggression usually just escalates the conflict. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to engage on someone else's terms. And when that doesn't work, when restraint is interpreted as an invitation for more attacks. It was a fair question, and one that Kate had wrestled with herself on many sleepless nights. Then you have to trust that others will see the situation clearly and respond appropriately. Charles's expression shifted, understanding dawning in his eyes. You've been waiting for me to see it, haven't you? All this time, you've been protecting yourself while giving me the space to recognize what was happening. Kate didn't confirm or deny the observation, but her silence was answer enough. Charles shook his head in wonder. Extraordinary, he murmured. You've been playing a much longer game than any of us realized. Before Kate could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Charles called for entry, and Camilla swept into the room with the kind of dramatic flair that suggested she had been building up to this confrontation for some time. I think we need to discuss what happened today, Camilla announced without preamble, her eyes flashing with anger. The way I was treated during the ceremony was completely unacceptable. Charles's expression went cold. The way you were treated? That's an interesting perspective. You deliberately undermined my position, Camilla continued, her voice rising. In front of the entire world, you made it clear that you value her opinion over mine, her comfort over mine. Kate found herself in the uncomfortable position of being discussed as if she weren't in the room, but she remained silent, sensing that this was a conversation that needed to happen between husband and wife. I corrected inappropriate behavior, Charles said flatly. Behavior that was petty, calculated, and beneath the dignity of your position. Camilla's face flushed red. Inappropriate? I was following protocol. You were manipulating camera angles and positioning yourself to overshadow Catherine, Charles interrupted. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise. The accusation hung in the air between them, and Kate could see Camilla making rapid calculations about how to respond. Finally, the queen consort lifted her chin defiantly. And what if I was? What if I was trying to remind people that I am the queen consort, that my position is established and recognized? Is that such a terrible thing? When it comes at the expense of family unity and institutional dignity. Yes, it is. Camilla turned to Kate with an expression of pure frustration. You see, this is what you've done to our family. You've turned my husband against me, made him question my loyalty, my commitment. Stop. Charles's voice cut through her words like a blade. Catherine has done nothing but serve this family with grace and distinction. If I've lost faith in your judgment, It's because of your actions, not hers. The silence that followed was deafening. Kate could see years of accumulated resentment and misunderstanding crystallizing into this moment, and she realized that there might be no way back from what was being said. Camilla's next words were delivered with icy precision. I see. So this is how it's going to be. You've made your choice, and it's not the woman you married. Charles looked suddenly older, weighed down by the implications of what his wife was saying. I've made a choice to support what's best for the monarchy, what's best for our family's future. I had hoped that choice would align with our marriage, but apparently that's not possible. Kate felt as though she were witnessing the dissolution of something that had taken decades to build. These weren't just angry words exchanged in a moment of passion. They carried the weight of fundamental incompatibility, of irreconcilable differences about what mattered most. I should go, Kate said quietly, not wanting to intrude further on what was clearly a deeply personal moment. No, Charles said firmly. Stay. You're part of this family, and you have a right to understand what's happening. Camilla's laugh was bitter and sharp. Part of the family. How quickly things change. How quickly loyalty shifts. Loyalty, Charles repeated thoughtfully. Yes, let's talk about loyalty. About putting family interests ahead of personal ego. About supporting each other instead of tearing each other down. About understanding that individual success strengthens the whole rather than diminishing it. Kate could see that each word was landing like a physical blow, and despite everything Camilla had put her through, she felt genuinely sorry for the older woman. This was a marriage imploding in real time, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. I think, Camilla said with forced dignity, that I understand the situation perfectly now. Thank you both for making it so clear. As Camilla turned to leave, Charles called after her. It doesn't have to be this way. We can find a path forward together, but it requires acknowledging reality and changing behavior. Camilla paused at the door without turning around. The only reality I see, she said coldly, is that I've been replaced in my husband's affections by someone young enough to be my daughter. Everything else is just window dressing. The door closed behind her with a finality that seemed to echo through the room. Charles remained standing by the window, looking suddenly fragile in his ceremonial robes that now seemed too heavy for his shoulders. Kate approached him carefully, unsure what comfort she could offer in such a moment. I'm sorry, she said softly. I never wanted to be the cause of problems in your marriage. Charles turned to her with eyes that held a mixture of sadness and resignation. You're not the cause, he said gently. You're just the catalyst that finally brought underlying problems to the surface. These issues existed long before you came into our lives. As the afternoon light faded outside the palace windows, Kate found herself wondering if this was how royal dramas always unfolded, not with grand gestures and public declarations, but with quiet conversations in private rooms, where the future of the monarchy was shaped by the very human emotions of the people who embodied it. The months that followed the confrontation in Charles's study brought a profound shift in the dynamics of royal life. The palace, with its centuries of experience in managing family crises, had quietly reorganized itself around the new reality. Separate schedules were maintained wherever possible. Joint appearances were limited to only the most essential state functions, and a complex system of diplomatic protocols ensured that personal tensions didn't spill over into public view. Kate found herself in an unexpectedly prominent position within the royal hierarchy. Charles's explicit support had elevated her status in ways both subtle and significant. She was consulted on decisions that had previously been made without her input, invited to meetings that had once been closed to her, and treated with a deference that reflected her new standing as the king's clear favorite among the family's senior women. The change was most evident during the planning for the upcoming Commonwealth Day celebrations. Traditionally, such events were collaborative efforts involving all senior royals, but this year's planning meetings had become exercises in careful choreography to avoid putting Charles and Camilla in situations where their personal tensions might surface. Kate sat in the ornate conference room at Buckingham Palace, surrounded by private secretaries, event planners, and senior courtiers. The discussion centered on the order of procession for the Westminster Abbey service, a detail that might seem trivial to outsiders, but carried enormous symbolic weight within royal circles. Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales could take a more prominent position this year, suggested Sir Edward Thornbury, Charles's private secretary, given her increasing role in Commonwealth relations. Kate noticed the careful phrasing "could take" rather than "should take." That left room for diplomatic retreat if necessary. But she also noticed that no one around the table objected to the suggestion. The silence spoke volumes about how thoroughly the power dynamics had shifted. "I think that would be appropriate," Kate said carefully, "though I'd want to ensure that any changes serve the dignity of the occasion rather than creating unnecessary complications." It was a diplomatic response that acknowledged the subtext without explicitly addressing the family tensions that made such considerations necessary. The assembled courtiers nodded approvingly, recognizing in Kate's words the kind of institutional thinking that had enabled the monarchy to survive countless personal dramas over the centuries. The meeting was interrupted by the arrival of one of Camilla's ladies-in-waiting, who whispered something urgent to Sir Edward. Kate watched his expression change from professional calm to barely concealed concern as he processed whatever news he had received. "I'm afraid," Sir Edward announced to the room, "that Her Majesty the Queen Consort will not be able to participate in today's planning session. She sends her regrets and asks that we proceed without her." Kate felt a familiar tightness in her stomach. Camilla's absence from such an important planning meeting was unprecedented and would be interpreted by everyone present as a significant escalation in the family tensions. The Queen Consort was effectively withdrawing from her royal duties, at least temporarily, in what could only be seen as a protest against her diminished influence. "Of course," Kate said smoothly. "I'm sure Her Majesty has pressing matters requiring her attention. Perhaps we could arrange for her to review our plans at her convenience." It was a gracious response that offered Camilla a face-saving explanation for her absence while ensuring that the work continued. But Kate could see in the faces around the table that everyone understood the real significance of what was happening. The remainder of the meeting proceeded efficiently, but Kate found herself distracted by thoughts of Camilla's isolation and the growing gulf within the royal family. Despite everything that had transpired, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were all losing something important in this conflict. After the meeting, Kate made an impulsive decision. Instead of returning to her own apartments, she made her way to Camilla's private sitting room. She found the Queen Consort alone, staring out at the palace gardens with an expression of profound melancholy. "May I come in?" Kate asked softly. Camilla turned, and for a moment her carefully maintained composure slipped, revealing something raw and vulnerable before the mask reasserted itself. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. Though I can't imagine what we might have to discuss." Kate entered the room and took a seat across from Camilla, noting how the older woman seemed to have aged years in the past few months. The strain of the ongoing conflict was taking its toll in ways that no amount of professional makeup could completely hide. "I came to see how you're doing," Kate said simply. "I know this has been a difficult time for everyone." Camilla's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Difficult? Yes, I suppose that's one way to put it. Though I suspect you might characterize it differently, given how well things have worked out for you." Kate absorbed the barb without flinching. "I've never wanted this to be a competition between us. I've always hoped we could find a way to work together." "Work together," Camilla repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Like we worked together during the state opening? Like we worked together during today's planning meeting that I wasn't really welcome to attend?" "You're always welcome," Kate said sincerely. "Your absence today was felt by everyone. These events need your experience and perspective." Camilla studied Kate's face as if searching for signs of deception or manipulation. "Why are you here, Catherine? What do you possibly hope to accomplish with this gesture?" Kate took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Because I think we're all losing something important in this conflict. Because the institution we both serve is stronger when we work together than when we're divided. And because despite everything that's happened, I still believe we can find a way forward. A way forward, Camilla mused. That's a lovely sentiment. But it seems to me that the way forward has already been chosen, and it doesn't include me in any meaningful role. The pain in Camilla's voice was unmistakable, and Kate felt a surge of sympathy for the older woman's situation. Despite her faults, despite the attacks and manipulations, Camilla had devoted years of her life to royal service, had endured public criticism and media scrutiny, had sacrificed privacy and personal freedom for the sake of duty. That's not true, Kate said gently. Your role hasn't diminished. Your experience, your knowledge of protocol, your relationships with various organizations, all of that remains valuable and important. But Charles's trust hasn't remained, Camilla said bluntly. And without that, what am I really? A woman playing dress-up in borrowed tiaras? The rawness of the admission caught Kate off guard. Beneath all the hostility and manipulation, Camilla was grappling with genuine insecurity about her place in the family and the institution she had married into. His trust isn't gone, Kate said carefully. It's been damaged, certainly, but trust can be rebuilt if both people are willing to do the work. Camilla was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Do you know what it's like to love someone for decades, to wait for them, to endure public humiliation and private doubt, only to discover that you still come second to the institution, that you still have to prove your worthiness every single day? Kate felt tears threatening at the pain in Camilla's words. No, she said honestly. I can't imagine how difficult that must be. And yet here you are, Camilla continued, her voice growing stronger, married to the future king, beloved by the public, secure in your position, offering me advice on rebuilding trust with my own husband. Kate recognized the shift in Camilla's tone and braced herself for another attack. But instead of anger, she heard something that sounded almost like resigned acceptance. I've handled this badly, Camilla said suddenly. I know that. I let my insecurities drive me to behaviors that were beneath my position and harmful to the family. But I need you to understand something, Catherine. This isn't just about jealousy or spite. It's about a woman who has given everything she has to earn a place in this family, only to watch someone else receive effortlessly what she's fought for her entire adult life. The explanation didn't excuse Camilla's behavior, but it helped Kate understand the depth of frustration and pain that had driven it. Understand, she said softly, and I'm sorry that my presence has complicated things for you. Camilla shook her head. You don't need to apologize for being good at this, for connecting with people in ways that I never could, for making it look easy when I know it's not. They sat in silence for several minutes, both women processing the weight of what had been said. Kate could see Camilla struggling with emotions that she had probably never articulated before, wrestling with the gap between her expectations and her reality. Where do we go from here? Kate asked eventually. Camilla sighed deeply. I don't know. I've burned a lot of bridges, haven't I? Said things that can't be unsaid, done things that can't be undone. Bridges can be rebuilt, Kate said gently, but it requires both sides to be willing to put in the effort. And what would that look like practically speaking? How do we move past months of conflict and resentment? Kate had been thinking about this question for weeks, and she had some concrete ideas. We start small. We find opportunities to work together on projects we both care about. We make public appearances that show unity rather than division. We stop seeing each other's successes as our failures. Camilla nodded slowly. And Charles? How do we rebuild what's been damaged there? That's between you and him, Kate said honestly. But I think he wants to find a way forward as much as anyone. He's not a man who gives up on people easily. As if summoned by their conversation, there was a knock at the door. Charles appeared, looking surprised to find Kate there, but pleased by the apparent civility of the scene before him. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important, he said, his tone carefully neutral. Actually, Kate said, rising from her chair, I think this might be perfect timing. I'll leave you both to talk. As she moved toward the door, Camilla spoke. Catherine. Kate turned back. Thank you for coming. for all of this. Kate smiled warmly. We're family. That's what family does. As she left the room, Kate could hear Charles settling into the chair she had vacated, his voice gentle as he began speaking to his wife. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone suggested that her conversation with Camilla might have opened a door that had been closed for months. The weeks that followed brought gradual but noticeable changes in the family dynamic. Camilla began attending planning meetings again, though she was more subdued than before, more willing to listen than to dominate. Charles seemed lighter, as if the prospect of healing his marriage had lifted a weight from his shoulders. The real test came during the Commonwealth Day service itself. As they processed into Westminster Abbey, Kate found herself walking beside Camilla for the first time in months. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Palace aides, media observers, and royal watchers all noted the apparent reconciliation between the two women. "You look lovely today," Camilla murmured as they walked, her voice just loud enough for Kate to hear. "As do you," Kate replied sincerely. "That shade of blue is perfect on you." It was a small exchange, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but Kate could see Charles's shoulders relax slightly when he heard it. The work of rebuilding trust and relationships would take time, but they had made a beginning. During the service, Kate found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them all to this point. The conflicts and confrontations, the moments of pain and misunderstanding, the gradual recognition that they all serve something larger than their individual egos and desires. As they emerged from the Abbey into the London sunshine, Kate felt a sense of cautious optimism about the future. The royal family would always be a complex institution, shaped by the very human emotions and relationships of the people who embodied it. But they had proved once again that love, patience, and genuine commitment to service could overcome even the deepest divisions. William took her hand as they walked toward their waiting car, squeezing gently in a gesture of support and appreciation. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. Kate smiled, thinking of all the challenges they had faced and overcome, all the relationships they had built and rebuilt, all the ways they had grown stronger together. "I feel like we're exactly where we're supposed to be," she said. As their car pulled away from Westminster Abbey, Kate caught a glimpse of Charles and Camilla in the vehicle ahead of them. They were sitting closer together than they had in months, and Charles's hand rested gently on his wife's arm. It wasn't a complete healing that would take much more time and effort, but it was a beginning. The future stretched ahead of them, full of challenges and opportunities, triumphs and setbacks. But Kate faced it with the confidence that came from knowing she had earned her place not through birthright or marriage alone, but through service, grace, and an unwavering commitment to the institution and the people they all served. The game had changed, but Kate had changed with it, growing from a nervous young woman into a confident leader who understood that true strength came not from defeating one's opponents, but from finding ways to transform conflict into collaboration. As the car wound its way back through the streets of London, past the crowds of people who had come to show their support for the royal family, Kate allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had remained poised through every challenge, had met hostility with grace, had responded to manipulation with dignity. And, in the end, that steadfast commitment to her values had not only protected her own position, but had helped heal a family that seemed destined to tear itself apart. The monarchy would continue, as it had for centuries, adapting to new challenges while maintaining its essential character. And Kate would play her part in that continuing story, confident in her purpose and secure in the knowledge that she had earned the respect and support of those who mattered most.